And welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast, Waiver Wire edition for week 12. I am Matt Okada, and we are mostly through week 11. Uh, Lots of great games, actually. Most surprisingly, a good amount of great games, particularly topped off by last night's Sunday night football game between the Bengals and Chargers. Congrats to the Chargers on looking like a legitimate contender. Really sorry for Joe Burrow and the Bengals, who just can't seem to get a break. Elsewhere on the week, the highlight by far was a player who I cannot yet name because we're going to get to him in a second in the waiver wire ads. That's all I've got to tease, really. So let's get into it. If you've got questions, who to pick up, who to drop, other stuff, anything fantasy related, drop them in the YouTube or Twitter chats if you're in them. And we will get to those at the end of the top five. Of course, these are just the top five. If you want the top every other player that I've covered, which is every player worth adding in a normal league at least, 4for4.com. The waiver wire column is up. You can get my 3,000 to 4,000 words every week on who to add. Dozens of players, prioritize top 10. All of it is there. And if you're not a subscriber, go to 4for4.com/plans and use promo code YouTube and you'll get 25% off and can read it. All right, let's get into it. Number one, the number one ad of the week, the number one player in my heart, one of my favorite NFL players for many, many years. It is Taysom the Great Goat Hill. Wild. Absolutely wild. Possibly the most wild performance we have seen all year from anybody. Of course, he needs to be tight end eligible for you to add him. But if he is, last week's or yesterday's, Sunday's performance was the best by a tight end all season. He had 138 rushing yards on just 7 carries. He had 3 rushing touchdowns on the ground. He caught 8 passes on 10 targets for 50 yards, and he had a completion for 18 yards. He also threw an interception, and it didn't matter. He still scored 30 to 40 points plus, depending on your scoring format. It was unbelievable. He looked incredible. He looked effective. He looked elite. The Saints are using him in a ton of different ways, more ways now than they ever did. Is this a result of the coaching change? I don't really think so. It seems more coincidental that it somewhat lined up with the coaching change. I think it is more related to Chris Olave being out probably for the season with the second concussion of his year and the fifth I think he suffered since college. He has been out now for a couple weeks, will be out for a couple more weeks minimum, has been seeing specialists, and feels to me on track to maybe not suit up again this year, if ever again in the NFL. Really, really sad, unfortunate situation because super talented player, obviously, but it does not look like Chris Olave is going to be back anytime soon. And since he's been gone, Taysom Hill has gone from a sometimes used running back, sort of fullback, funny guy, red zone person, to all of those things plus some in the run game, and now a off-targeted tight end slash running back out of the backfield in the passing game. Derek Carr has been finding him often, and Taysom Hill is one of the best running with the ball in the league. It's very hard to break down. Has crazy size or speed for his size. Just all around incredible. My first post on the new social app Blue Sky, if you aren't on there yet, feel free to go check it out. You can find me. Was on November 15th, which was Friday, I think. And my post was Taysom Hill is an elite NFL weapon. That's all. Just wanted that to be my first post on this app. And I legitimately believe that. He is an elite weapon for NFL offenses, and we saw it yesterday. Obviously, he's not going to score 40 points every week. This is probably going to be his best week of the year. That being said, unless you have one of the elite tight ends, which there's very few, I think it's legitimately become the case that Taysom Hill is probably the best streamer of the rest of the bunch. Because with this kind of involvement, his floor is now raised and his ceiling is so much higher than you're ever going to get with a Mike Gesicki, or I would say Jonnu Smith. He just had a huge game as well. But even his huge game wasn't as big as Taysom's. So that's kind of exactly the point. If you're needing a tight end, if you've been streaming, if your tight end is hurt, Taysom Hill is your guy. Rostered in 54% of leagues. So he might be out there for a lot of you. Waiver priority number 1. All right, let's get to number 2. Number 2, and also kind of number 4, spoiler alert, I'm going to cover them both at once because they're on the same team. It is Jerry Jeudy, rostered in 51% of leagues, and Elijah Moore, rostered in 8% of leagues. I've got both of them in the top 4 overall waiver priorities this week. MacFam asked a question in chat. Are we now fading Tillman, adding Elijah Moore? Question mark. Lol. I do have both in Dynasty. I will be answering that question as part of this pickup. These 2 pickups, actually. So, Jameis Winston is spreading the ball around a ton. He's Jameis Winstoning, basically. This past week against the Saints, who were actually a decent defense against quarterbacks, Jameis threw the ball 30 or completed the ball 30 times on 46 attempts for 395 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy had 11 targets. Elijah Moore had 8 targets. Cedric Tillman had 8 targets. David Njoku had 9 targets. It's not probably always going to be quite that good where literally everyone of note in the passing game has a very good opportunity to be effective. But it's going to be the case more often than not that multiple of these receivers are good. And so for that reason, they should all be rostered. The difficulty becomes figuring out who to start on a weekly basis. And it is a pretty strong difficulty. I think we're going to need to do some deep dive data analysis to figure out maybe who's best against what kinds of defenses. So who's running the most out of the slot, who's running best against man or zone, who's running the best on deep balls, and then when a defense or an opposing team has weaknesses at certain spots on that list, then we maybe know to focus on those receivers. So check with us. Check with John's rankings every week because he does all that analysis. Check with us on the waiver or the most accurate pod on Fridays. You can drop questions in the chat if you want to know who to start, and we'll give you our thoughts. It's going to be a week by week thing. That being said, just looking at these 2 guys in particular, because Cedric Tillman is already rostered in more than 60% of leagues. Jeudy has had 8+ targets, 5+ catches, and 70+ yards in 3 straight games. He had 142 and a touchdown yesterday. Elijah Moore has 29 targets total over those same 3 games, and he scored 15.6 half PPR fantasy points on Sunday. Cedric Tillman had been the best guy over the first couple of the Winston games. He still had 8 targets, but he only caught 3 for 47. What is worth noting, on the only 3 catches that he got, he still had 47 yards. And that's the bonus of Cedric Tillman, is he doesn't need as much work to be effective. That said, he needs to catch, 50+% of his targets, which he didn't do this game. And a touchdown would be nice. He didn't get that in this game. He has previously. David Njoku, by the way, in the meanwhile, had 9 catches on those 9 targets for 81 yards, so he was great. All of this would be easier to figure out and to stream again or stream with if the Browns had better matchups down the stretch. Unfortunately, they do not. Through the rest of the fantasy season, they have 5 games against opponents that are ranked top 8 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So that's real tough. The silver lining there is that they get the Bengals in week 16 and the Ravens in week 18 if you play through week 18, which you shouldn't. But worth noting there. The Bengals in week 16 is still a great matchup. Both those teams are very, very low ranked in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wideouts. They're giving up some big games. So there could be some league winning opportunities there with any of these guys. All of this being said, Judy and Moore need to be added in every league. Cedric Tillman should not be dropped in any league. And David Njoku obviously is David Njoku. He should already be rostered in every league. So add these guys, and then in terms of who to play on a weekly basis, it's going to be a week by week defensive research sort of thing. We'll have to figure it out as we go. But make sure they're rostered in your league because they're very good. All right, number 3, coming in between the two Browns guys, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who was indeed here in this waiver wire podcast last week and in my column last week. Unfortunately, he was only added up to 25% of Yahoo leagues. The fortunate part of that unfortunate failure on the part of all these Yahoo managers is that he's still available in 75% of those leagues. So he's probably available in your league. I went into significant detail on him in last week's column. Talked a lot about Rashid Shaheed primarily, and how that role in the Saints offense was a particularly good one that had been very lucrative for Rashid Shaheed earlier in the year. And then he got hurt. They didn't have anyone to do it. And then they very intentionally went out and got Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And shocker, surprise, look at this. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who is perfectly suited to that role, has been very good in the last 2 weeks, basically his first 2 weeks of any kind of action with New Orleans. 87 yards and a touchdown this past week on just 2 catches. That's right. 15.7 half PPR fantasy points in total. 13.6 of them came on a single catch and run, incredible catch and run by MVS. Typically, when you get that from a player, you think, okay, well, that's not sustainable. I'm not adding that guy. The funny thing with MVS is we're relying on exactly those kinds of plays and expecting them. Those kinds of plays, catch and runs with his speed, and the deep ball, Derek Carr, moon ball, chuck it up, and he catches it downfield type plays. He did have 1 or 2 more of those kinds of targets, by the way. Didn't quite come down with them. One of them came from Taysom Hill, and it was not thrown too well, and that was the interception that Taysom threw. But had MVS stumbled on the play, I think, to take some blame off of Taysom Hill. If MVS hadn't stumbled and he might have been able to jump up and catch that ball, would have been an even bigger game for him. So Taysom Hill is seeing a lot of targets all of a sudden, but outside of him, they do not have anyone of particular note. They have Alvin Kamara, who's going to get targets, and they have nothing else, basically. No wide receivers that are of any threat for the target count. So I think MBS might still have room to grow in that category. And ideally, he needs to, because he only had 4 targets in this game. We're not going to feel comfortable starting a guy who's only getting 4 targets, even if he is MVS and can break any one of them for 15 points on a single play. We still would like to see more targets, but I think that they can come as he continues to work into this offense, because there's simply no one there to throw to besides Alvin Kamara and now Taysom Hill, who's more heavily involved. So I think MBS is basically a must add. He's not necessarily a must start, but I do like starting him more often than not, particularly against teams that are suspect to the deep ball. That's another thing to watch and research for. So that's MBS at number 3. We hit Elijah Moore on number 4. All these guys, by the way, all these receivers at the top, worth, in my opinion, 6 to 7% for Elijah Moore, 8 to 9% for the other guys in your fab budget, which is a pretty decent amount. Now, let's finish with number 5 before we get to Q&A. That is quarterback Bo Nix. Last week, I highlighted Bo Nix's rookie annihilation of green matchups or bottom 10 defenses in AFPA to quarterbacks. He had another one of those matchups on Sunday against the Raiders. No, not the Raiders, against the Falcons. And he had a 29 fantasy point, 300-yard, 4-touchdown monster of a game. Was absolutely incredible. He looks legit. And on his current pace, is potentially challenging Jaden Daniels for Rookie of the Year. I've had a small camera snafu for the people who are watching. Hello, camera. All right. Well, hopefully it comes back. If it doesn't, such is life. We have no camera for now. Where was I? Bo Nix. Yeah. So basically, I like starting him and playing him in just about any matchup. If it's a really, really tough one, I would be happy to sit him for a different stream if I had a different stream. But at this point, this far into the season, I think he's gotten his legs under him enough that I'm going to feel okay about him in any game or in most games. That being said, the real important thing with Bo Nix is the good or great matchups because in those, he has been crushing. And because he's a streamer type guy, or you have another quarterback most likely who's decent when you have Bo Nix, you can continue to stream him and play the matchups between your two guys, assuming your other guy is decent. The other great thing about Bo Nix is he doesn't really have a tough matchup for the rest of the season. He gets the Raiders next week, who are 25th in AFPA. He should demolish the Raiders. And then he has basically like mid-tier matchups for most of the rest of the season, with green matchups against the Colts in week 15 and the Bengals in week 17. Both of those games in the fantasy playoffs promising huge things for Nix once again. So because he doesn't really have a tough matchup down the stretch, if you want to, I think you can add Bo Nix and ride him out as your QB1 rest of season, which is pretty cool. He brings rushing upside. He's passing the ball incredibly well. The receivers there are starting to shape up a little bit. And then in those green matchups, you should be streaming him over just about everyone. I think he's legitimately in, like, let's just say in green AFPA matchups, which, by the way, you can always find on 444.com on their player pages. I think he may likely be the quarterback 5, basically, behind the elite 4 of Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. Bo Nix has shown that in the good matchups, he should not be counted beyond anybody besides those 4. And sometimes, in fact, in several of those particular games, should be counted ahead of them. So great stuff from Bo Nix. He's number 5. Pick him up. That is the top 5 list. Taysom Hill, Jerry Jeudy, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Elijah Moore, with Bo Nix coming in at quarterback number 5 if you need one. Again, if you want to see the full list, 444.com/plans, use promo code YouTube for 25% off. All righty. Let's get into the Q&A. Chester D starts us off asking, will Tank Dell have a big game? I think he will have a good game, Chester. Cowboys defense has been atrocious, but Nico Collins, actually, let me double check. I believe Nico Collins has been officially cleared to play. Yes, he will be back. So Tank Dell's upside is definitely reduced with Nico Collins back a little bit, but his floor might also be raised because Nico Collins will start to take some attention away and let Tank Dell run free a little bit more. So I really like him as a play. He should be a good play. Just maybe not quite the upside he's previously potentially had. MacFam. Oh, this is the question I noted earlier. Are we now fading Tillman, adding Elijah Moore? So I think I answered this, but we are adding Elijah Moore for sure, but I do not believe we are fading Tillman. He, in my opinion, is still honestly the best of the Browns wide receivers. He has the most upside, I would say consistently. There is a chance that he has the lowest floor, maybe, but I do think that this last week was just a little bit of a fluke. And more often than not, he will just be very good rest of season. He's the most prototypical wide receiver one on that team, I think. Michael Quenzel with a super chat. Thank you, Michael. Started off saying, "Hi, Matt. Thank you for the show. In PPR, I'm 10-1. Should I trade?" And then finish the question with, "Should I trade Kelsey for Bowers straight up because of Bowers' better playoff schedule? I'm 10-1. Thanks for the show." If you can do that, I would do it regardless of the playoff schedule, because Bowers has just been better all season, basically. So even if the schedules were roughly even or Travis Kelsey was a little ahead, I would probably be making that trade. But if I haven't looked, if Brock Bowers' playoff schedule is also good, let's take a gander, then I would be even willing to put in a little extra if the Kelsey owner doesn't want to trade him straight up. Broncos is not great in week 12, but then Chiefs, Bucks, Falcons, and Jaguars over the next 4 weeks, and Saints even in week 17 are all pretty decent. Yeah. I would be happy to make that trade straight up. If they say no, I need more, I would give them more potentially. Because I do believe Bowers is just much better than Kelsey rest of the season. Jermaine Robinson asks, just when I think I'm out, he pulls me back in, parentheses, Taysom Hill. Correct, Jermaine. Although you should never be out on Taysom Hill. If you follow me and my work, you will never be out on Taysom Hill. Use my number 3 claim on him. I already have Njoku. So Njoku's one of the few guys that has looked good and consistent enough that I would feel fine rolling with him rest of season and not necessarily needing Taysom Hill. I would still consider it if you've got players on your roster that you can happily drop and if there's no one else better on the waiver wire. For example, like it's worth noting, this priority waiver list is in a vacuum essentially. But let's say you have David Njoku, but you just lost a couple wide receivers. You're pretty banged up, and your wide receiver 2 right now is, I don't know, someone terrible. Demario Douglas, who's, by the way, not terrible and is in the waiver column, but you get my point. He's just much lower on the list. In that case, I might rather add Jerry Jeudy or MVS or Elijah Moore than Taysom Hill because I'm getting a starter that I need, even though I prioritize them less in a vacuum than Taysom Hill. Additionally, one of the reasons Taysom Hill is this high is because the tight end position is so valuable and shallow that it elevates the good tight ends when they're on the waiver wire higher in priority. So I would not say it's a guarantee you should use your number 3 claim to get him. I just do believe he's a very, very good option who's better than most other options on the waiver wire in a vacuum. MacFam said, "Lol, I saw their matchups coming up." Speaking of the Browns, I believe it's going to be tough, but I hope Jameis still throws for more than 250 yards each game. Yeah, it is very tough. This is why I mentioned that I'm not jumping over the moon about who to play rest of season. Just for heads up, the next 4 games: Steelers, Broncos, Steelers, Chiefs, who are all top 10 in AFPA after week 11's adjustments to those rankings. And then really good one against the Bengals. Worth noting, though, the Saints are 6th in AFPA, and that's who Jameis Winston just bodied for 395 yards and 2 touchdowns and 106.7 passer rating with no interceptions. So, take that for what it's worth. Although it also is worth noting Marshawn Lattimore's no longer on that team. He was before. So maybe they're, more like 10th in AFPA than 6th. But still, very good by Jameis. And I think he still will have opportunities to throw a lot. Okay. MacFam says, "I may be getting ahead of this podcast. Are we adding Vele and Amir Abdullah this week? Maybe a rental just a week or so on Amir." I have very, very little interest in Amir Abdullah. Was there an injury to Alexander Madison that I missed? Let me check real quick. There was. He hurt his ankle. Do we have an update on him yet? Doesn't look like we do. Okay. So I still don't really know if I want to add Amir Abdullah. He's a good pass catcher. In PPR, if we get news that Alexander Madison's going to be out, I guess it's not the end of the world to play Amir Abdullah. They're playing the Broncos, so that doesn't really excite me. I don't think he'll be very good. I don't think Alexander Madison will be very good next week either, for the record, though I do like him in a few games for the season, and I have him as a streamer. Vele, I do have in the waiver wire column, though I have noted on him that he's a deep, deep league stash, basically. I don't think you're going to feel good about starting him in a particular week just yet. He had 5 targets, caught 4 for 66 against the Falcons, who are a pretty bad defense against the pass, and Bo Nix obviously had that huge game. I think that Vele will have a couple more good games, and I hope that he has a proper breakout very soon so that we can just start relying on him and starting him. But he hasn't really had that just yet. So all we really have of him is he's flashed and looks good in limited opportunities. And I think if he gets more of them, he could be very useful for fantasy. So I do like him. He's kind of a stash. I don't really like Amir Abdullah, but if you're desperate at running back and we do get news that Alexander Madison is out, you can stash him away. Jermaine Robinson asks, is this the week we sell off Hunt? If so, what kind of tier of wide receiver would net back in return? I have a huge hole in my wide receiver slot in the league. Rest of my backs are Henry, Gibbs, Brooks, and Tracy, half PPR. This is going to depend entirely on the other managers in your league, Jermaine. You should try to sell Kareem Hunt because I think Pacheco will be back soon. But whether you can and what you can sell him for depends entirely on the other managers in your league and what they think is going to happen with Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco. If they believe Pacheco is going to be back and Kareem Hunt's going to be nothing but a handcuff rest of the season, you're not going to get very much of anything for Kareem Hunt in a trade. If you pull off the trade quickly, which I actually said you should do last week, but if you do it this week and someone else doesn't think about Pacheco coming back or just looks at Hunt's good game logs recently, I think you can get a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 pretty easily. But that involves finding a manager that's not paying all that much attention. So try for that. I don't think you're super likely to get it. If you can get a decent wide receiver 3 that is flexible somewhat often, I would be okay doing that with Kareem Hunt because unless we get news that Pacheco's not going to be back, but I expect that he will be. Yeah, Mac fam with referencing back to a question from Friday's pod, Danny Dimes and a mid to late first for Bo Nix. This is why I told you on Friday's pod, Mac fam, it is an absolute smash, and that I thought there was a good chance Danny Dimes would not play again for the Giants and may not ever get a job again. If this is still there in your trade queue, please, for the love of all things holy, leave this podcast if you have to and go accept that trade. That is an absolute smash. And would take Bo Nix by a mile. Freezy Fantasy. Trade Derrick Henry and Debo for Bijan and Juwan Jennings. No. I don't think you're doing this. Bijan Robinson has been very good. I get that, but so has Derrick Henry. And Juwan Jennings has had the bigger game than Debo Samuel this past week, but I don't think that's going to be a weekly guarantee. I think it will probably go back and forth between these guys. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, etc. Worth noting, George Kittle was out this game, and I think that does benefit Jennings a little more than Debo. I don't think I'm making this trade. I get the question, though. It's not as crazy as it might seem on first look, but I don't think I'm doing it. Cody Watts followed that up with a similar question. Should Debo be on the bench here out? He seems too shaky. I have JSN and Chase Brown thinking of rocking with these two. Well, I would always start Chase Brown over Debo Samuel pretty much at this point. Chase Brown has reached elite tier. He's like a solid RB1 now, rest of season, I think. JSN, I'm not starting with confidence over Debo Samuel every week. I think that's going to be a week-to-week matchup type play. JSN was very good in this game with DK Metcalf coming off injury, but I think it's going to be a week-to-week decision thing. I know it's very hard to look at a game where they just played each other. Debo went for 4 for 22, and JSN went for 10 for 110, and think, how am I ever starting Debo over JSN again? But I don't think that's a guaranteed lock. I think that you're going to want to play the matchups a little bit, and next week we could easily see Debo far outscore JSN. Rinkside Rips says, first commandment, thou shalt not speak of Marquez Valdes-Scantling as a fantasy-relevant player. Listen, you are echoing the initial thoughts of John Paulson when I brought up MVS last week, Rinkside Rips. But I was able to convince John to add him at the Scott Fish Bowl. He left him on his bench, unfortunately, but he was on my starting roster and scored 17 fantasy points. He is still MVS, which is a flash in the pan, needs a big play kind of guy to be any good. The difference is this role and opportunity in New Orleans with the lack of other guys and Derek Carr's proclivity to chuck it up to a MVS type or previously Rashid Shaheed type guy, I think makes MVS more likely to be good on a weekly basis than he was in other systems. He will have some duds. Let's just be clear about that. He will have some duds, which means he's not a must start. But I think in decent matchups, in games where the Saints are going to throw, which is most of them because they're not that good as a team, in games with questionable secondaries, I think MVS is playable and is definitely fantasy relevant. Ringside Rip says, who do you like going forward, Herbert or Knicks? I really like both, honestly. Let me look at the schedules real quick, and I will use that to fortify my answer. Justin Herbert has really good matchup next week against the Ravens, then another good one against the Falcons in Week 13. Week 10 against the Chiefs isn't great, but that feels like a game he'll be throwing a lot, and it could be a great duel. So I'd still probably start him in some leagues there. And then the Bucks is an unbelievable matchup in Week 15. And then Week 17 against the Broncos, which sucks. So he might be a bench in Week 16. Week 17 against the Patriots, that is perfectly playable. So a lot of good matchups there. Bo Nix gets the Raiders this next week, which is great. Browns in Week 13 is fine. Bye week in Week 14. So if you're looking for just one guy, it's Herbert because he doesn't have a bye. But you should be streaming between two guys like this. And then Colts in Week 15 is a great matchup. Chargers in Week 16 is a fine matchup. And the Bengals in Championship Week is a great, great matchup. That one's huge. So I really like both. If you say I have to pick only one, I'd probably go with Herbert just because he has no bye week. But you don't have to pick just one in fantasy football. You can probably pick one of them and another streamer. Maybe if you're really lucky, you can have both of these guys and play them back and forth. Otherwise, I'd pick the one here that you like better and then get a combo streamer who can fill in the holes, a.k.a. someone with Bo Nix who has a good Week 14 matchup so that Bo Nix's bye doesn't matter, and then you really just love Bo Nix down the stretch. So that's my take there. Cody Watts, 10-team PPR, Burrow, Brees Walker, Brown, Brooks, Kupp, Nico, Debo, JSN, Tillman, Waddle, Kelsey, Ingram. Wow, just the whole roster here. And the question, any moves? This is very, very vague and high level, Cody. So pretty tough to give a super clear and concise answer here. Your running backs are great. Your quarterback is great. Your wide receiver room with Nico back is amazing. And you're fine at tight end with Kelsey and Ingram. If you can sell Kelsey or Ingram for one of the truly elite tight ends, because Kelsey's kind of like borderline elite, he seems to disappear a little too much. If you can get a Brock Bowers, a George Kittle, maybe even a Cade Otton, I think I might like him better. I would potentially look to do that. I'd be fine like packaging Waddle and Kelsey to get Bowers or Kittle if he's healthy. Maybe a move like that. Otherwise, I think you can roll with your roster and probably win. Freezy Fantasy says 10-man PPR. Trade Debo and B-Rob for Bowers. I have Jamar and Amon-Ra at wide receiver and Derrick Henry at Chase Brown at running back. Okay. I'm assuming that means Brian Robinson, not Bijan Robinson. You can't say B-Rob in fantasy these days, Freezy, without clarifying. If it is Brian Robinson, yes, I would probably do that, assuming you have some other good players behind those top two starters, because you need a flex, I assume, in most leagues every week, and you're trading potentially two of your better flexes. But if you do not have a good tight end, if you have a bad tight end, and you have some other decent flexes that you can rotate in behind where Debo and Brian Robinson would be, then yes, I would do this to get Brock Bowers. I think he's a tight end one. If it is Bijan Robinson, by the way, no, you're not doing that. Rob H says, I actually need to pick up a wide receiver due to my MVS being on bye. I have Thielen on the bench. How do you rate him compared to Judy/Moore? Nowhere near them. I do not trust Adam Thielen until we see something very impressive from him. I think there's a great chance he has 5 targets and catches 2 of them for 15 yards on a weekly basis. So I would take Judy or Moore pretty confidently. MacFam, Cedric Tillman for Pacheco. Is this an okay value? No word of Pacheco practicing yet. That is an okay value, assuming Pacheco comes back basically at all. Because if he comes back at all and you get Pacheco for the playoff run for Cedric Tillman, that's a massive, massive swing. Great play because Pacheco is an elite RB1. Assuming, of course, he's healthy and gets a full complement of carries and catches and snaps and everything. If Pacheco's not going to be back anytime soon, that makes us a lot tougher, but I think he is. So, and you may have to try to beat the news, honestly, because if the news breaks that Pacheco's going to be back next week, I don't think you can make this trade successfully. So I'd probably recommend trying to beat the news and just hoping Pacheco does return. As long as you have some wide receiver depth to make up for Tillman. Ringside Rips with a follow-up question. Do you like AR, Anthony Richardson, over Herbert or Nix going forward? No, I don't. I still don't trust Anthony Richardson fully. He did do what he was supposed to do all draft season this past week. Had a huge game, completed 20 of 30 passes, which was his best completion percentage all year. Passed for 272 yards, which is a season high by far, and rushed for 32 yards and 2 touchdowns on 10 carries. 28 fantasy points. That is the Anthony Richardson we thought we were getting when people were drafting him as a top 6 player. Problem is, I've seen a whole lot of doo-doo from him this year and just that one game of great. Now, of course, that was the first game back off of his benching. Maybe he learned some stuff over that benching and is fixed himself and is going to be this good rest of season. If he is going to be this good, I would prefer him over these 2 guys. Problem is, I don't trust him to be this good yet. So I would not, if I had to make the choice now, I would rather have Herbert or Nix. If I can have Richardson and one of these guys, that's the most ideal thing, honestly, ringside. If you can pull off having one of these 2 guys and Anthony Richardson, just for fun, let's check who Anthony Richardson plays in week 14. He's on bye. Okay, so if you're going to do Richardson and someone, it would have to be Richardson and Herbert, not Richardson and Nix. But if you could have Richardson and Herbert to where you're playing Herbert, but if Richardson proves himself consistently, you all of a sudden have another top end QB1, then that feels pretty great. So I'd like to have 2, but again, if I can only have 1, it's not Richardson just yet. Rob H, would you sell high on Dobbins? Chargers are pass heavy now, and Dobbins lost almost all goal line carries last game. Well, he may have lost almost all goal line carries. I'd have to double check on that. But he scored 2 touchdowns, and one of them was from the 1-yard line. So I don't really feel too concerned about that. Yeah. Gus Edwards had 6 carries for 27 yards and did not score a touchdown. So I could pull up the goal line carries again for a double check, but if one of the guys scores 2 touchdowns total and one of them comes from the 1-yard line, I'm probably not going to be too worried about that usage. The pass heaviness does hurt a little bit because he was relying on 15 plus carries to be great earlier on in the season. That being said, with the Chargers offense being this good and being a little more high flying, it does give Dobbins more chances for touchdowns, which is why he scored 2 in this game. So I still like Dobbins a lot. I don't think he's a sell high. I think you could sell him for the right price, but I don't think he's going to be bad rest of season or anything like that. Rinkside Rip said Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I'm tilted. How dare you? Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the GOAT. Augusto Kashishian says, would you do Gibbs and Addison for Wilson and JT? Okay, so I'm assuming that's Russell Wilson. So trading Russell Wilson and Jonathan Taylor for Jahmyr Gibbs and Jordan Addison. I mean, this is very heavily team dependent because Gibbs and JT are pretty similar. I think I'd prefer Gibbs. Let me double check what Jonathan Taylor did this week with Anthony Richardson back. 24 carries, 57 yards. I mean, great usage, not great production at all. Yeah, I like Gibbs a little bit better than Jonathan Taylor, but they're pretty similar. I don't really like Addison. I don't think he's a consistent start. I do like Russell Wilson as a quarterback, but if you're in a 1 QB league, quarterback values are just so low when it comes to trading. You can get great guys off the waiver wire all the time, and you probably have another good guy, obviously, if you're making this trade, unless you're the one trading for Wilson. Either way, there's probably good quarterbacks on the waiver wire that are almost as good as Wilson. So I think I prefer the Gibbs and Addison side here, but it's basically just Gibbs for JT, and I like Gibbs a little more, and that's why. The other two guys I just don't think are that valuable in typical QB1 leagues or 1 QB leagues. Toby says, which 2 QBs to roll with rest of season? Tua, Russell Wilson, Drake May, and Geno. It's probably Tua and Russell Wilson, just looking at these names in a vacuum, Toby, but I will say what I have said many, many times over recent podcasts, which is go to 4for4.com or actually just go to Google, type in the quarterback's name along with the words 4for4. The first link will be their player page on 4for4.com. Pull up all 4 player pages and scroll down to the little bit of their page where you see their schedule rest of season with their matchups and their adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterback ranking, including green or red for the really good or really bad matchups. Pull all 4 of those guys up, and find the best combo matchups wise rest of season and play those 2 guys. So you want to combo 2 guys such that you basically have a green matchup rest of season. If you can do that, then that's your ideal duo. If not, if they don't fit together perfectly well, again, I think I prefer Tua and Russell Wilson, but the other guys are not bad at all. They will both have good games, Drake and Geno, that is, in good matchups. And it might be the case you can't get a green all the way down the stretch, but just get the best you can and be willing to pick someone up and stream them in a green if your 2 that you pick in the combo doesn't have a good one. Michael Quenzel, in Superflex Dynasty, what is good value for Anthony Richardson? Wow. This is a really tough question because Anthony Richardson is on such a crux hinge point of his value. I think, given the fact that he's back to being a starter, had a great game last week, and should continue to figure it out in Indy, hopefully, I think it's going to be still going to be a 2 firsts sort of thing. any goodish starting quarterback is worth 2 firsts. And Anthony Richardson, as long as he continues to figure out whatever was plaguing him for the first half of this year, should be that kind of player. Remember, he was drafted as a top 6 redraft quarterback this year and just really was awful for the start of the season. And so we feel really bad about him. But I think he can continue to develop. So I would say he's still worth 2 firsts. Roadhouse 1911 says Geno, Richardson, or Russ Wilson. Which QB do you grab and start? 4-point passing. Okay, so I'm assuming then that this is just looking at this next week you're streaming. Richardson gets the Lions. They are 11th in AFPA. That's not terrible, but it's not great. Geno Smith gets the Cardinals. They are 19th. I do like that matchup. Should be a high-scoring game, or at least a good chance at being one. And Russell Wilson gets the Browns, who are 13th. Not particularly great either. I think I will lean Geno by a hair there. Richardson second and Wilson third. But none are incredibly great starts. Nick says, should I trade Higgins and Devontae for A.J. Brown? Devontae Smith, that is. I would say maybe not unless you have such great wide receiver depth that you're not starting one of those two guys on a consistent weekly basis. Because for most people, Higgins and Devontae Smith are both going to be in your starting lineup, and both of them should be in your starting lineup. They're quite good and have been quite good. It's tough for me to give up 2 good starters for one great one, which admittedly A.J. Brown is. But if you have 3 or 4 good wide receivers and then Higgins and Devontae, then it's a smash trade. I mean, it's not a smash trade necessarily. Those are still 2 very good players. It seems like maybe a bit of an overpay, but it's an overpay that might be worth making if you're consistently benching Higgins or Devontae. I just don't think that's likely. But that's my context for that. Ringside Rips asks, wouldn't it make sense for the Chiefs to save Pacheco for the playoff run in January? Great question, Ringside. I actually have what I think is a very valuable, relevant take on this. And Andy Reid, if you're listening, pay attention. I think this is a prevailing misunderstanding or assumption that you should rest your injured players if you can down the stretch to save them, quote unquote, for a playoff run. Problem is, and we see this all the time in the preseason with holdout players, when you're out of football for a long period of time, you get out of football shape. You just aren't as hardened. You're not as ready for the hits. You're not as ready for the hard cuts and all this stuff. Football players need their bodies to be in football shape in order to stay healthy and be effective. Pacheco is going to be out of football shape after 8, 9, 10 weeks not practicing or not playing. I think that they need to get him back into action immediately so that he can ramp back up to full football shape and be 100% for the playoff run. Also, as worth noting, the Chiefs just lost their first game, obviously, to the Bills. And they have on their upcoming schedule the Chargers in week 14, which figures to be a pretty tough game the way the Chargers are playing. The Texans in week 16, the Steelers in week 17, and the Broncos in week 18, all of which are pretty tough games. They are going to need Pacheco to be playing and active and healthy and good for those games, I think, or at least they're going to want him to be. So I do not think that they should or necessarily even will save Pacheco. I think that they will start getting him into game action so that, as I've noted, he gets back up to game speed sooner than later. C. Xavier says, appreciate the stream. Would you trade Tyreek plus Downs for Kyron in half PPR? Ask for Ladd to add in. Given the dip of Kyron's workload, Tyreek's small bounce back, and Downs' improvement with Anthony Richardson. I mean, if you can get Ladd back, I would love that because I actually like Ladd McConkey better than Josh Downs, and I think Kyron Williams can be worth more than Tyreek Hill given the positional difference. I do think Tyreek Hill is going to be good rest of season. Uh, he needed Tua to come back and their connection to be reestablished, and that seems to have been the case. I don't trust Josh Downs yet for the same reason I don't trust Anthony Richardson yet. He had his best passing game of the year, and he completed his most passes, or at least his highest percentage. But I don't know if that's going to be the case. And if it falls back to old Anthony Richardson, then Downs becomes doo-doo again. So in that case, you're getting a win. If you can get Ladd added in, that's an even better win. I would try to do that and make that trade. If you're really in need of running back, I might make this trade even if you can't get Ladd added in. That's assuming you have really good receiver depth, which I assume you do if you're trading away Tyreek and Downs and not getting any wide receiver back. Ringside Rip says, smash that like, peeps. Big facts. Feel free to smash that like. Lucius Varanus 44 says, see Benson on waivers. Would you drop Mason, Pearsall, Thielen, or Waddle for him? Redraft full PPR 12 team. Yes. I would absolutely drop Thielen. I would absolutely drop Pearsall. And I would probably drop Mason. Oh boy, am I dropping Jalen Waddle for a handcuff running back? That seems a little absurd. Jalen Waddle had 3 targets, 2 catches, and 37 yards this past week against the Raiders in a good matchup, and he's just not done it. You know what? I'm cutting bait. Do it. I mean, don't do it because you can drop Adam Thielen instead. Do that to pick up Trey Benson, but also worth noting, Jalen Waddle has reached droppable territory at this point, which is absurd. Rob H says, how do you rank these defenses for this week? Pitt, KC, Washington. Let's look at the matchups. Washington gets the Cowboys, so it's going to be pretty hard to beat that. But let's look at the other ones. The Steelers get the Browns. No, although that's not a bad matchup either. And the Chiefs get the Panthers. Oh, that is a good matchup. Also, I'm going to take the Commanders against Cooper Rush. Pretty hard to beat that. Andrew Apostolicus says Chase Brown for Devontae Adams full PPR. Probably not, unless you're desperate for a wide receiver. Chase Brown has been pretty much, as I said earlier, elite. He's a locked and loaded RB1. Devontae Adams has been pretty good, but he's like a fringe wide receiver 1, mid wide receiver 2, more likely, and at a position that's not as valuable. So I don't think I'm doing that unless you've got 5 great running backs and are desperate at wide receiver. Rob H says, Goddard or Hunter Henry rest of season? I mean, that's pretty close. Let me look at the schedules real quick. Dallas Goddard gets mostly good ones with an incredible matchup against the Panthers in week 14 and a good one against the Rams next week. Bad matchup against the Cowboys in week 17. Hunter Henry gets bad matchup next week against the Dolphins, then a really good one against the Colts, then a bye in week 14, then bad ones down the stretch. So I would say Goddard here, given the bye and the rest of the mess. Worth noting, though, that in week 13, if you can stream Hunter Henry against the Colts, that would be pretty fun. But all things considered, I'll take Goddard. Xavier, with some additional context to that trade question, running backs and wide receivers are Brees, Jacobs, Irving, and Brooks, plus some handcuffs. Jamar, Tyreek, Devontae, Amari. Oh, you're the one with Devontae going to get Chase Brown? Yes, I would do that. Go get Chase Brown. Easy. Okay, that is it. That is all the questions we have in chat. We got it to 54 minutes. That was so much Q&A. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks for all the questions. Good stuff. Oh, that's another person. Oh, true. Thank you, Xavier. Oh my goodness. Thanks for clarifying. It is the Tyreek and Downs for Kyron trade. Okay, let me double check this. So you're much better at receiver. You're not as good at running back. So okay, so it's the same sort of thing. I think I might have confused it because it was the same sort of thing. You're getting a strong RB1 by giving up wide receiver depth that you don't need as badly. So yes, I would do it. Thank you for clarifying or for correcting me. Okay, that will be it. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for all the good questions. Good luck on the waiver wire. May your fab bids ring true. I will see you all on Friday's Most Accurate podcast with John Paulson or in the Discord tomorrow night. If you are in the 444 Discord, I do a Tuesday night AMA. Hop in there. All right. Oh my goodness, there's one more question. You know what? We have 5 minutes left. I will sign off with this question, Cap for Life. Gentlemen, hang loose, heart, dolphin, salute, finger point. I wonder if that means that this person is a Dolphins fan. AR5 or Darnold moving forward. I need a wide receiver 1. Okay, I don't know what the wide receiver 1 has to do with it, unless you think you're going to trade them, one of these guys, for a wide receiver 1, which seems very unlikely. Sam Darnold has a rough schedule, or at least he has a couple bad matchups. And he's kind of fallen off lately. I think I might consider Anthony Richardson here, but I'd much rather have both or combo both with some streamers. If you can combo Darnold, for example, with someone who's got a good Week 12 and Week 15 matchup, which is the 2 games that he plays the Bears, then that would be a better opportunity, because then he's got good matchups in the other games. Cap for Life clarifies, I want to package Darnold and Smith. Okay, if you can package Darnold and Smith for a wide receiver 1 and you have Anthony Richardson as your quarterback, then yes, I would probably do that if you can pull it off. All right, that will actually be it. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one. Good luck on waivers. See you soon. Adios.